Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays, and tonight is the final episode of What to Watch Wednesdays here on 88.1 The Burg. It feels so surreal to be saying those words out loud, but it is unfortunately very true. Tonight is the grand finale episode of What to Watch Wednesdays after nearly 3, maybe 4 years on the air. If you've learned anything about me by this point, it's that I can't count to save my life, and I'm not going to start anytime soon. But that doesn't mean we can't have fun, and have fun we shall. Tonight's episode is going to be breaking the mold in a very special way for a very special franchise. Normally, I introduce this show as the show where I talk about 3 movies all in the same night. And I've only broken that record once when I talked about the Sharknado movies, all 6 of them. Tonight, we're talking about 9 movies. 9, you heard me right. And what 9 movies could we possibly be talking about? Well, we are going to be talking about the 9 Godzilla movies I would recommend. That's right, the 9 Godzilla movies I would recommend. Almost taking it as a Godzilla starter pack for people who aren't huge, super mega fans of Godzilla like I am. I figured what better franchise to talk about than the Godzilla movies, considering how big of a fan I am of the Godzilla series. Why not do something very fun and do a trilogy of trilogies? Because if you think about it, 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 9. And it also avoids this being a top 10 list, because I hate top 10 lists. Again, for petty reasons, which I'm not going to get into, because we have a lot of movies to cover. And we have some fun music to play. And, you know, it's the final episode. Might as well have some extra fun with it. So, without further ado, we're going to go to break. And when we come back, we'll jump into the first 3 movies I'd recommend. Stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie out of 9 on the watch list tonight, we have the original Godzilla from 1954, available to rent from places such as Amazon, Fandango at Home, Apple TV, YouTube, I'm guessing, I hope, and other places such as that. Or you can watch it on the Criterion channel, if you're so inclined. For the basic plot summary of the original Godzilla, we follow Japan, where after being awoken by nuclear testing, Godzilla decides to wreak havoc upon Japan, and, you know, things happen. Maybe that wasn't a good plot summary, but that's because I didn't try too hard with the plot summary, because we're not here for the plot summaries. And you know what this movie's about. You know it's about Godzilla. Everyone knows about Godzilla at this point, and everyone knows that it started with this movie. Which goes into kind of the first reason, or more so first segment per each movie that I want to talk about, which is why am I recommending this for my starter pack? The 9 movies I'd recommend you watch if you're not a huge Godzilla fan person like me. And I think the why's pretty self-explanatory. If you don't start with the original, what are you doing? I'm legitimately serious. If you've never seen the first Godzilla movie from 1954 and you want to call yourself a Godzilla fan, you're not a Godzilla fan. Full stop. Mostly my opinion, but I feel very strongly about that opinion. If you haven't seen the original, you're not a real Godzilla fan. I honestly could not think of a better way to start off this list. What else could I put here? What else would be in this spot? But that doesn't tell you the full picture. Let's explain a little bit why I would like to recommend this movie. More so what this movie means to me as, you know, a critic, a person, an enjoyer, a fan, just overall the whole picture. I honestly think the original Godzilla, while it's not a perfect movie, in my eyes at least, it is a good very enjoyable movie for me to watch. That was a weird sentence. I'm going to back up a little bit and say this much. I wasn't sure what attracted to me towards Godzilla when I watched this movie. I just kind of wanted to know what it was about. And so might as well start with the original, right? Over the course of time, what this movie taught me to appreciate is that not only does it have roots in a very serious topic, that being post-war Japan in the wake of World War II and the incidents at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it also taught me that when it comes to localization and when it comes to American treatment of foreign films, we are not perfect, and we never really have been. This was the movie that introduced me to the idea of dubbing and removing scenes and editing stuff out and putting in an American actor and remaking a movie in a way that really downplays the cultural relevance of it and its symbolism. And I learned a lot from figuring out that there was an original Japanese version of the 1954 Godzilla, which is why this comes with the big caveat that if you're going to watch the original Godzilla, you have to make sure you're watching the Japanese language version with English subtitles. Don't go for the one that has Raymond Burr. You won't get the same experience. They are very different movies. With all that being said, we're going to move on to the next movie on our watch list. We got to keep this moving somehow. So after the first one, we have King Kong vs. Godzilla from 1962, available to watch on the Criterion Channel or from the large Godzilla box set collection from Criterion itself. For the basic plot summary of King Kong vs. Godzilla, we follow a pharmaceutical company that kidnaps King Kong and is trying to improve TV ratings. Meanwhile, Godzilla shows up, and then they decide, let's make King Kong and Godzilla fight each other to get even better ratings on our TV show. Yeah, it's weird going from the original 1954 Godzilla movie to King Kong vs. Godzilla, but stick with me here. There's a really core reason why I'm recommending this movie, and I'll get into it when I talk about what this movie means to me, but on a surface level understanding, this movie is significant in the grand pantheon of cinema because it's a pretty early example of crossovers, and it's also still relevant today, you know, with the new Kong versus Godzilla and now them being a part of the Monsterverse together and teaming up all the time. This is where it started. This is objectively where it started. This was the third movie for both Godzilla and King Kong, and it's worth watching for that alone. I will say, however, that the movie's not good. Stick with me still. I'll explain. The movie may not be great, but it is very entertaining. Comedically, this movie is 100% a satire. It is a satire of pharmaceutical companies, of TV in Japan during the 60s. It's a satire of bigwig corporate people. It's a satire of everything, and you can tell from the moment it starts that they are not taking themselves seriously in the ways that count, as in they're not trying to be all intellectual about their satire. They're trying to have fun with it. The closest comparison I could make is a Mel Brooks movie. I'm not even joking. And the monsters look terrible. The suits look awful, but that makes it funnier. I can't describe how much fun I had rewatching this movie years after I'd seen it as a child and realizing, wow, this movie sucks, but in the best way possible. Again, I need to overemphasize, this is the original Japanese version, not the American dub. You may lose a lot of things in translation, which is why I specified the Criterion box set, which might put some people off on being able to see this. But if you're willing to watch it and willing to track it down that way, I cannot recommend it enough personally. It is so funny, and it gets the point across in a way that is really interesting. Especially today with Godzilla and Kong now representing a lot of corporate stuff here in America, having been teamed up for a couple movies. If you think about it, it's interesting to see where that progression has gone since the 60s. With all that being said, we need to wrap out this section with the third movie that I would recommend. That being Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla from 1974, available to watch now on Max. For the basic plot summary, we have a bunch of aliens that invade and bring up Mechagodzilla with them, which leads Godzilla to not only confront his mechanical doppelganger, but also team up with King Caesar, this deity from Okinawa. You know, this god that they have called King Caesar, that they reawakened with a statue. So that's the plot summary. Remember that this is Godzilla, and you're not exactly always here for the plot. You're sometimes here for the symbolism and what they represent, rather than, you know, extremely well-written plots. But, I mean, that goes to show why this movie's worth watching, because this movie's just a lot of fun. It's so much fun, and it has a jazz soundtrack. If I'm being completely honest, there are some parts of Godzilla that I'm convinced are my introductions to cinematic concepts. What I mean by that is I have memories in my mind of, oh, here's a cinematic concept that I wasn't fully familiar with that I then learned about through watching Godzilla movies. And that brings up why Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla is so special to me. It's the movie that made me understand what a fast-paced movie looks like and what that really means. And when it comes to pacing, I had so much fun watching this movie as a kid, and watching it again, it was just like, it's so impossible for me to not have fun watching this. I could watch it over and over and over again. I love nearly every moment of it. Even the parts that slow down a little bit, those are so close to the end of the movie, and it picks right back up when it does slow down. It's so worth watching. I can't recommend it enough. With all that being said, we're going to go to our first break, and we're going to jump into the next three movies that I'll be recommending, so stick around for that. 88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for the fourth movie on our watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Return of Godzilla from 1985, available to watch now on Max. Man, it feels so weird to be saying the fourth movie when I usually talk about three movies. But regardless of that, let's get into the plot summary. During a time of political turmoil, in Japan specifically, a resurrected Godzilla appears, and they must contend with that while also dealing with Russia and the United States and a lot of other things going on during the course of the 80s. If you think about it for a second, because the original Godzilla movie was about post-World War II, and this is set in the 80s, there's a couple political things going on in the world at the time that Godzilla is now used to comment on in this movie. I'll get into that right now. Here's the thing about Godzilla 1985. Part of the core reason I'm recommending it is because you can technically watch the first Godzilla movie from 1954 and jump straight into The Return of Godzilla from 1985 and not miss anything. 1985 is basically a reboot of the entire series, and it ignores nearly every other movie that came before it except for the original, which makes it interesting because, as I said, the original was about post-World War II era Japan. And this movie is about Japan when faced with the prospect of the Cold War. It's not basically the Cold War. It's not implied to be the Cold War. Russia and America show up in this movie, and they ask, can we nuke Godzilla? And Japan has to contend with that. It's definitely about the Cold War. There's no getting around it. It's about the Cold War. And that leads into why this movie, or more so what this movie means to me and why I recommend it on a personal level. I wouldn't say that The Return of Godzilla from 1985 is one of my favorite Godzilla movies out there. It's nowhere near my personal top 10, but it makes it onto this list on the sheer basis of it is worth watching, and it also expands on the ideas present in the original movie. Any Godzilla movie that is tied to the original in some way I can respect and will definitely recommend, especially this movie, because of how it ties into the Cold War in the 80s. It does a really good job of using Godzilla as symbolism for what do we do regarding the Cold War and what are the ethics of that? How do we respond to it? And how would Japan respond to it, being one of the only countries that's been nuked before? It's worth examining for sure, and it's worth using Godzilla to examine that, considering where he came from. With all that heavy stuff out of the way, we're going to jump into the next movie that I recommend from this list of mine, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1991, available to watch on HBO Max. I said Max in the last recommendation. I need to go back and correct it to HBO Max, but whatever. Here's the basic plot summary of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. A bunch of people from the future show up, and they say, "We're from the future. Would you like to go back to the past to erase Godzilla from existence?" And the human race decides collectively, yes, let's do that. So immediately, once again, we have this weird transition from very serious first recommendation to goofy second recommendation. You know, we went from the Cold War to now time travel. Weird, it's kind of whiplash. It's given me a bit of whiplash. I never realized how much whiplash it would give me, but here we are. So, why on earth would I recommend this movie? Well, because if you think about it, and more so if you watch it, you'll realize that this movie is basically just Terminator with Godzilla. And I mean that in a literal sense. There's a character who's a cyborg who can run really fast, and it's just a reference to Terminator. I wish I was kidding, but it's Terminator. It's Terminator, but with Godzilla, which leads perfectly into why I like this movie and why I personally recommend it. I cannot, for the life of me, say that I don't enjoy this movie because of how silly and dumb it is. It's a lot like King Kong vs. Godzilla. It's kind of the thing that introduced me to how you can really confuse an audience if you're doing a time travel plot. This movie for sure introduced me to that idea of, wow, time travel's confusing. And do you think that the Godzilla people know how to make a time travel movie work? Chances are they probably don't, which makes it even more enjoyable when it inevitably kind of folds in on itself at certain points if you think about it too much. And then there's this weird part where, like, I want to say 3/4 of the movie in, but 3/4 of the way into the movie, very near the end, but not at the end, I weirdly got emotional watching this movie. It's weirdly sad at a certain point because of how they use the time travel. And I can't really spoil it. I could, but it's like, okay, how would I possibly spoil a time travel plot? First of all, how could I, quote unquote, spoil a Godzilla movie? Second of all, and third of all, why would I do that? There's a lot of just overlapping clash of interest here, and it's also just like, it's physically impossible for me to do because you're not watching these movies for the plot most of the time. You're watching them to be entertained and see how Japan has used symbolism, but this isn't symbolism. This again is just Terminator with Godzilla. So we're gonna move on now, so I don't repeat myself. I don't repeat myself. I for some reason was gonna say bears repeating and repeat myself, and it turned into bear repeat myself. So we're gonna move on to the sixth movie I would recommend, that being Godzilla vs. Destoroyah from 1995, available to rent from places such as Amazon, YouTube, Fandango at Home, Apple TV, etc., etc. For the basic plot summary of Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, we follow Godzilla, who is about to melt down. Being that he is an irradiated creature caused by nuclear testing, he has a lot of radiation inside of him, and it's reaching meltdown points, and it's probably not going to be a good thing. Meanwhile, a new enemy in the form of Destoroyah emerges. And this is where it gets interesting, because this movie is in the same timeline as The Return of Godzilla from 1985. This creature is spawned from the Oxygen Destroyer, the thing that is used to kill Godzilla in the original 1954 movie. And because of that, we get a perfect tie-in to why this movie's worth watching. Weirdly enough, you could watch just these three movies from this era of the 80s and 90s Godzilla and get a pretty amicable experience of what the 1980s and 90s Godzilla movies were like, because we have a tie-in to the original in the Return of Godzilla. We have the goofy Terminator one in the form of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, and we have Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, which is this weird wraparound story arc that also ties back into the original movie from 1954, nearly 40 years later. It's really interesting. And I say all of that, going into the personal reason, I say all of that with the understanding that before I ever watched this movie, I thought it was overrated. I thought Destoroyah wasn't a cool monster. I thought I wasn't going to like the movie. I thought it was just a bunch of crock. I didn't know whether or not I would enjoy the movie. And I sat down and watched it, and I liked it. I really liked it. I took back all of my opinions about it being overrated instantaneously. I thought it was great. It's really amazing. I don't want to say too much just buzzwords, but if I were to describe it, it's, again, weirdly sad near the very end. I can't get into why, but you could maybe guess what it is if I said that Godzilla is on the verge of meltdown. For some reason, it's kind of sad by the very end of it, especially for a fanboy. And honestly, Destoroyah's a really good monster. He's a really good monster. To go up against Godzilla, it's just a match made in heaven. There's so many things about this movie that are just worth experiencing on your own. With all that being said, we're going to go into our next break, and when we come back, we'll jump into the last three movies I would recommend, and our last segment here on What to Watch Wednesdays. Stick around for that. 88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our seventh movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. From 2001, available to watch now on Tubi. I gasped there because that is a very long title to say out loud. Either way, we're going to jump into the quick plot summary. We follow Godzilla, who would have thought, who is now possessed by spirits of a long-forgotten war. Well, not long-forgotten, but spirits from a war that are now possessing him and forcing him to destroy Japan. And he's now wreaking havoc, and humanity must reawaken a couple ancient deities to fight Godzilla because, you know, he's super possessed. Okay, so that's a very interesting plot summary because it's probably one of the first times where they've, you know, addressed, yeah, there are a bunch of people who died during this war. If I remember correctly, it's during the Pacific Gulf War. And they're just like, yeah, a bunch of people died during this war, and they're possessing Godzilla right now. And all of those spirits are very angry with Japan, and so they're going to destroy Japan. And here's a bunch of ancient guardians, and we're going to reawaken them, and they're going to fight. And it's just like, okay, that's a pretty heavy concept for a Godzilla movie, considering most of these are about aliens or just Godzilla being reawakened by nuclear testing. That's a bit more spiritual with that sort of coding of wartime reactions. But that doesn't exactly matter when it comes to why exactly I am recommending this movie. In the surface level assessment, I'd say that part of the reason I'm recommending this movie, it's called GMK by the fans. And that's very important to remember because this movie is a fan favorite. People really like this one. They really like the music. They really like a lot of the visual effects. They like the storyline. They find it interesting. And it is also pretty cool to see Godzilla with whited out pupils being this kind of spiritual guardian in a way and being fought off by Ghidorah and Mothra and a random other monster called Baragon that they all fight together. I say random other monster as if I don't already know everything about Baragon and all of his backstory, but that's not important. What is important is that this movie is also made by the people who created the Gamera trilogy from the 90s that I talked about near the end of my show last year. I love the Gamera trilogy from the 90s specifically, and those people later went on to make this movie. And so because of that, a lot of fans of Gamera are in turn fans of this movie. And of course, vice versa. You know, you get into Gamera after being a fan of Godzilla. So I get all of the hype behind it. On a personal note, this still isn't one of my favorites. I don't like it as much as a lot of other fans do. Maybe it's just a me thing. I get the hype, but I also am not fully in love with it to the same degree that a lot of other people are. And I can't exactly put my finger on why, but I can say part of it might not be helped by the fact that the title is incredibly long and I find it really annoying to say it out loud, but I also will say that I still enjoy this movie. And again, this is called Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. That's really annoying to keep saying out loud over and over again, which is why it's called GMK. But either way, it is worth watching for, again, that interesting commentary and twisting Godzilla to be a different sort of symbolic figure than what he's usually meant to represent. With all that being said, it's now time to move into the 8th movie that I'd recommend from the list of Godzilla movies out there. And this is a controversial pick. I would put Godzilla Final Wars from 2004, available to watch on Tubi, on this list. For the basic plot summary of Godzilla Final Wars, we follow humanity as it is attacked by aliens, and the aliens decide to enslave all of Earth's monsters and make them attack the Earth. And now humanity must unleash Godzilla to fight the aliens. And there's also a bunch of super soldiers and a pro wrestler who plays a general with a samurai sword, and Matrix references, and Godzilla is overpowered in Matrix references, and it's really stupid, and it's got a lot of 2000s metal music in it, kind of, in a way. There's at least one Godzilla, there's one 2000s metal song in this movie. Let me explain something real quick. This is a controversial pick because notoriously, this movie is polarizing in the Godzilla community. You'll have a entire half of the Godzilla fan base who loves Godzilla Final Wars. They adore every second of it. They will not shut up about it, and they will always recommend it. And you have another half of the fandom who hates this movie. They despise it. They think it's a terrible celebration of 50 years of Godzilla, because if you do the math, 1954 to 2004, 50 years. This is the 50-year celebration movie. This is the 50th anniversary of Godzilla. And some people really don't like it for being an anniversary. They don't like how overpowered Godzilla is. They don't like a lot of the choices regarding the other monsters. They don't like the plot. They don't like the pace. They don't like that it's an action movie. They don't like fun. They're annoying. I don't like those fans. I disagree with those fans. And I personally think those fans are dead wrong. Let me get into exactly why I recommend this movie on a personal note. I love Final Wars. I'll say it. I love this movie, and anyone who's in the Godzilla fandom who doesn't like it is wrong in my opinion. Again, it's my opinion, but I feel very strongly about that opinion because, let me explain something to you. It's a fun, fast-paced action movie with Godzilla in it. This is the movie that made me realize that I love, absolutely adore, fast-paced action movies for how stupid and nonsensical and crazy and wild and weird and funny and ultimately creative they can be. With Godzilla. Godzilla Final Wars is the reason I love action movies as much as I do. It's part of the reason why I've talked about so many action movies on this show. I can trace it all directly back to Godzilla Final Wars. I'm not even kidding. This is the movie that made me realize what I like about action movies. Everything I just said. Now that that's out of my system, let's close off with the 9th and final movie that I would recommend from the Godzilla series. The last movie on our watch list, the last movie I will talk about here on What to Watch Wednesdays. And it's a very fitting choice. I would pick Godzilla Minus One from 2003, available to rent from places such as Amazon, Fandango, Apple. It doesn't really matter. You can watch Godzilla Final Wars somewhere on the internet, I'm sure. For the basic plot summary of Godzilla Minus One, we follow a failed kamikaze pilot as he must face his survivor's grief in the form of Godzilla in a post-war Japan, set right after World War II. You can probably tell exactly why I'm going to recommend this movie. It's very similar to the first one. It's a spiritual successor in a lot of ways. But that doesn't actually cover even the surface area of why I recommend this movie on a base level understanding to people who have any knowledge of filmmaking. And that is basically the entire general populace most of the time. If you know what makes a good movie good, you will watch Godzilla Minus One and you will realize, wow, this is a good movie. That's the basic of it, the base level of it. That's the basis. Took me 3 tries, but I said it. That's the basis of it. You watch it and you'll realize, wow, this is an actually good, well-made movie that has Godzilla in it. Which gets to exactly the personal reason why I recommend this movie, because on my end, I watched this movie being a lifelong Godzilla fan, and it affirmed nearly everything I love about this franchise, everything Godzilla has come to represent over the years. I find that Minus One's use of Godzilla is on point. It captures everything the original was trying to do, but in a much more human and down-to-earth way. If anything, it's in there for being better than the original 1954 Godzilla movie, which is really hard to do in my eyes. I nearly cried watching Godzilla Minus One. Watching Godzilla, I nearly cried. Not for some weird reason like in the 90s movies, for legitimate reasons, because it is that emotionally impactful. I can't recommend it enough if you're interested in the Godzilla series. It is a marvel of both storytelling in comparison to every other Godzilla movie, and also in visual effects. It won an Oscar for it, for crying out loud, for a good reason. With all that being said, thank you all for tuning in to What to Watch Wednesdays tonight. I will not be back next Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. here on 88.1 The Burg for another episode of What to Watch Wednesdays. This is, again, the final episode. If you want to follow along with What to Watch Wednesdays, listen to all of the archived episodes, or just keep track of what I'm going to be doing next in my life, be sure to follow along on Instagram at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces, and to view the archived episodes at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces, on YouTube. Be sure to follow along if you're interested, because while the show ends tonight here on 88.1 The Burg, it may continue in some capacity on the internet somewhere. And if it does, I'll be there telling you all what to watch. Good night.